I have three books that I recommend entrepreneurs read. These are like our three business Bibles. The first is Outsiders by Will Thorndike. And he was the last investor in our company. And he studied Berkshire Hathaway. He studied seven other companies, General Dynamics, Washington Post, a company called Teledyne. And these are companies most people have never heard of. And the first page is a stock chart comparing their collective performance to the S&P 500 over time, and to the most famous CEO that everyone had heard of, Jack Welch, and his performance over time. And it's just like a hands down, no contest crush fest. Like they absolutely crushed it. And he says the way they did it is they understood how to generate capital and increase capital generation in their businesses over time. And they understood how to allocate capital. And he doesn't call it the sovereignty game, but basically most of the principles of what we've codified as the sovereignty game are in that book, right? And so I think from reading that book and from our other experiences, we're trying to sort of extend it and write the sequel, so to speak. And that's why we have more and more clarity on what the sovereignty game looks like. But none of the businesses that he talks about in that book are technology companies. And so, when I was first introduced to Mr. Thorndike, like that was my pitch. It's like, I want to build the first sovereignty game business in the technology industry, and so that's the first book. The second book is Seven Powers by Hamilton Helmer. And this is a book about how to defend a business from competition. And the seven powers are scale economies, network effects, switching costs, cornered resources, counter positioning, process power, and branding. And a business could, in theory, develop all the powers, but what really matters is which one you're going to be able to get to first. And if you can phase into power before your competitors, you have a barrier. And he makes you very aware that we usually talk about benefits, like there's so many benefits to using Invisible. But what actually matters is barriers, which is why can't people solve that problem themselves or use some other company to solve that problem? Why do they need to use you? Why are you the only source of that supply? And those barriers end up creating the enterprise value over time. And he tells some great stories. And the Netflix blockbuster story is one of the main ones that really stuck with me. And then the third is Innovator's Dilemma by Clayton Christensen. And the Innovator's Dilemma is, of the three books, it's actually the most subtle and nuanced of the books, because the Innovator's Dilemma shows up in a whole bunch of different ways. And a really good example is actually Infiniti. So you asked me earlier, what does our corporate structure look like? Our corporate structure is basically my sort of PhD thesis about how to solve the innovator's dilemma. That is the challenge that we're trying to solve as a company, because we don't want to lose the entrepreneurial magic, and we don't want to stop doing 0 to 1 innovation as we scale. But scale is the enemy of innovation in most companies. And so you can understand how this works from a numbers perspective, actually. If by the end of the year we hit our targets and we do, we're at a 250 to 300 mil run rate, and these new businesses, I started an incubator called Infiniti last January, and the incubator is a business, and there's 7 businesses inside of it, and each of them has CEOs. And by the end of this year, collectively, they're tracking for $10 million run rate. But that's only one, that is like 3% of the overall group revenues or less. It's such a small percentage of the overall revenue. Seemingly, it doesn't matter. But every year you play out the story, this incredible dynamic occurs. So Invisible's growth rate, because of physics, will slow down, even if we continue growing at an incredible rate. Because let's just say next year we grow to 500 million of revenue, and the year after that we grow to 850, and the year after that we go to 1.2, the year after that we go to 1.6, and then 1.9. Eventually you slow down your growth rate over time, as long as like last year we were at 300%. This year, 150 was the goal. Next year, 100 is the goal. Then it becomes 80 and 70 and 60 and 50 and 40 and 30. As long as you stay above 25, you're actually in legendary performance territory if you can maintain that over 20 years, right? That's what Apple did, Amazon did, Berkshire did, all the companies that you've heard of as legendary businesses, they stayed at 25% plus compounding over decades. And that's why my favorite website is mathisfun.com/compound interest calculator. If you really play with the compound interest calculator, it's mind blowing what 25% does over 20 years. But these new Infiniti companies, even though they're only like 2% of our revenues this year, next year they're going to grow at over 100%. And they're going to stay at over 100% a lot longer. As the big business matures and the growth rate slows down, the small businesses will be able to stay at hyper growth, super high growth rates, and will be able to piggyback on the success of the big business, which will lift the group average. But the only way you can do that 0 to 1 innovation is you have to have separate structures. You have to put people in separate boxes. You have to ring fence them and create these separate businesses with separate cap tables. And so the way we've done it is the CEO of a new company inside of our incubator gets a path to owning 25% of that business. The team, the employee stock option pool, has a path to 25%. And we, for the first 5 million into the business, are getting 50% of the business and control over the business. And we're networking all these businesses together. So there are AirPods, iPhone, iPad, MacBook. It's operations as a service, hiring as a service, strategy as a service, sales as a service, finance as a service. That's what we're doing. But that structure, allows that board, that CEO, that team to focus on growing that business without too much interference or distraction from this big company, and it gives them the resources they need. If we tried to do that sort of innovation inside of the big company, they would be crushed. They would not get any time, any attention, any energy, any money, and what a waste! What a missed opportunity. So when you're dealing with too much opportunity, there's one solution, which I think is the sort of amateur solution, which is focus. Just pick one of the many opportunities and just focus on that because it's big enough. But the real pro move, which Christensen gets at, is set up separate businesses, and each one of those businesses should focus. But that actually allows you to achieve the meta goal of going after the entire opportunity.